Well, thank you very much for joining us. I want to welcome you to another iteration of the Ireland at Boston College Global Leadership Fireside Chat series. It's my pleasure today to welcome to this series Minister Michael McGrath, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. And we'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but our partners in this program are deeply helpful partners of the Irish Consulate here in Boston. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Laoise Moore, who has a few things to say to us. Laoise.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's a real pleasure to be here once again virtually at the Ireland at Boston College Fireside Chat series on leadership. As people who have joined this series before will know, it was originally conceived of as an in-person series of engagements. And then, of course, the pandemic struck and disrupted life in almost all aspects. But I'm really delighted that we've been able to continue to have such a strong series of conversations in this new format, because it has really helped us at the consulate to make sure that those really strong links between Ireland and the US and Ireland and Massachusetts in particular have remained over this period of disruption. And somebody who is an alumnus of Boston College, Minister McGrath, of course, will know how important those links are. And I'm really delighted that he can join us today, because it is not an exaggeration, I think, to say that the brief of Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform has been one of the most important during the pandemic, both in terms of our health response and how people whose lives and whose livelihoods and businesses have been disrupted, how they have been supported. Also, I think as we stand at this point where vaccination programs are really ramping up both sides of the Atlantic and we look to economic recovery, I think it's not an exaggeration again to say that the pandemic has prompted us to reflect on the way that we spend public money and the way that we deliver public services. And the minister has had and will have a crucial role in that conversation. So I think this is an especially timely occasion to have a discussion on these points. So just to say thank you so much, Bob, for hosting us once again. And thank you so much, Minister, for joining us. And I look forward to this conversation. So back over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Laoise. I appreciate your support. And we're really excited today to welcome Minister McGrath to this conversation. If you have questions, as always, please feel free to send those to us via the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll relay those to the minister and try to address those as soon as possible. Minister, thank you again for joining us. We've known each other for a few years. You took part in a exchange program that we ran a number of years ago on political leadership, and you joined us. At the time, you were not in government, but you were in a leadership position. But before all of that happened, you studied accountancy and you practiced accountancy. And in 2007, you made that jump to electoral politics. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why you made that jump and what drove you towards public service, and then further into public service and into the leadership roles that you've occupied as a member of your party from the fall and as a member of government.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are. And I'd like to just start by thanking yourself, Bob, and everyone at Boston College for the invitation. It is genuinely a great honor to be asked to participate in this series, having looked at the fantastic speakers that you have had previously, and really delighted to have the opportunity. And I do, of course, want to acknowledge and thank Laoise and her team at the Consulate General as well in Boston for all of their ongoing support and engagement, and for all that they do for the Irish community, Irish American community, and for the further deepening of our very close relationship. Thank you for your first question, Bob. It's not the easiest one, but for me, I guess, really from quite a young age, I was interested in current affairs in the broad sense. I was always a keen student of history in school, and in the home that I grew up, my parents would always have encouraged myself and my siblings to take an interest in what was going on around us. So really it was a sense of community. I think my own late father certainly was very influential in that he wasn't formally educated himself, but he had a great sense of the world and a great sense of the importance of what was going on around us. And he encouraged all of us to take a keen interest in what was going on in wider society. So I think from quite a young age, I would always have been in an environment where the news was on or the newspapers were being read. And then when I went through secondary school, I had one particular teacher who definitely gave me a great love of history and Irish history in particular. And I think as I went to University College Cork then for my undergraduate degree, it was at that point that I think I really made the decision that even though I had a lot of choices, thankfully, that I did want to put myself on a path where going into public life was an option. And thankfully, I had some luck along the way, and opportunities opened up, and I was in a position to take them. So for me, it really is a genuine sense of public service. I love being involved in making decisions that impact on our communities, on our country, on our wider relationships across the globe. It is a tremendous privilege to be serving in the Irish government, and have reached this level is something that I get great personal satisfaction from. But I can certainly trace it all the way back to when I was a small lad growing up in Passage West in Cork, and really admiring those who were involved in public office at a very local level. And I could see the level of involvement they had in their community and what they were able to achieve. And that was hugely influential on me personally.
Minister, we'll turn to some of the consequences of the COVID crisis and how Ireland is recovering from all that in a few moments. But you said something very interesting in an earlier interview, and this is now a couple of years ago, that anyone who's in politics should want to be in government. You want to be in a position of consequence, essentially, you were saying. I mean, how do you feel about that now, after the challenges of the past year and a half? I mean, do you still have the same sort of enthusiasm and excitement for those big leadership challenges? How has it changed during the crisis for you?
Yeah, it has changed dramatically, and I think my experience of the last 12 months in government, and in 3 days' time, it will be the first anniversary of the government in Ireland coming to office, and for me personally, it will be the 1-year mark as well as a minister. I mean, it's a great honour to serve in Parliament, but to have the opportunity of serving in government, it is at a different level, and it really is the place where you can exert real influence and you can actually make a difference. And I had a long apprenticeship. I was elected to Dáil Éireann back in 2007 when the late Brian Lenihan, our former Minister for Finance, passed away. In 2011, I became the party spokesperson on finance, and I responded to 9 budgets from the opposition benches. So I learned my trade over a period of time, and I think I was ready when the opportunity arose a year ago following the election. And as you know, we had a long period before a government was formed, not least because the pandemic was really taking hold at that stage. But then I came into office in late June last year, and it has been a roller coaster. I mean, it has been absolutely non-stop, but at a personal level, a tremendous experience. And I know that I have been at the heart of decisions that have impacted on millions of people, quite frankly, and you do feel that enormous sense of responsibility on your shoulders, and thankfully I'm surrounded by great colleagues in government, and also lucky to be served by a fantastic team of public servants who I hold in the highest respect. So all of that has really helped, but it has been one big milestone after another. And as you know, like so many other countries, we have been in and out of COVID restrictions. We've had to adjust our economic plans sometimes no sooner after they have been announced. And so we've had to be very flexible and adaptable and just help to get the country through with as minimum amount of damage as possible. And I think we are, notwithstanding current challenges with variants and so on, I think that we are now in a much better place overall, particularly thanks to the vaccination program.
We'll turn a little bit to the specifics of the COVID response and the vaccination program and the current state of Ireland. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what your actual ministerial brief is. The Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. It's I don't want to say it's not an intuitive title, but it's not one that I think a lot of people probably understand and how it relates to the everyday workings of government. I mean, if you're a Minister for Education, you see education policy.
Yeah.
Minister for Health, you see vaccination policy. I mean, what role have you played in supporting government and its functions during this crisis period, as minister?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think it's worth pointing out that this particular role is only a decade old. Up until then, from the foundation of the Irish state, the Minister for Finance managed both the expenditure side of the equation and the revenue side and the overall fiscal framework. And so a decision was made to split that role a decade ago, and we have now gone back to that position in the lifetime of the current government. And I think that was the right decision because it is an enormous brief. So to try to do this and the Department of Finance, I think, would be a really big ask. So the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform is responsible for managing state spending, which in Ireland this year is going to be of the order of 90 billion euro. My job involves agreeing the annual budget on the expenditure side, but then managing expenditure with colleagues, with line ministers on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Almost all roads in government lead to my department. Very little can happen really without it going through the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. In addition to direct spending responsibility, we are responsible for public capital investment. And I know that the new Biden administration in the States has a very ambitious infrastructure improvement plan. In Ireland, similarly, we have a very exciting national development plan, which is currently being reviewed. So I am responsible for the public capital investment program. In addition, I have overall responsibility for the public service, about 350,000 public servants, including civil servants. We are in charge of public pay policy, public pension policy. We are in charge of procurement. We are in charge of the government of the Chief Information Officer. So a very wide range of responsibilities, but at its core, it is about managing public spending, but it is also about the reform side. We have a reform division that is about improving the delivery of public services, and that's something I'm particularly keen on. And then in areas such as whistleblowers legislation, protected disclosures, freedom of information, the regulation of lobbying, ethics and public life, we are responsible for all of that framework as well. So as you can see, it's very broad, really interesting, and it is at the heart of government, which is something I really enjoy.
I mean, it is a fascinating role where you are bringing together the revenue side of things into the actual program for government and what other ministers are trying to do. I mean, how do you navigate those inevitable conflicts? And I imagine that some of those conflicts would naturally be across parties in cabinet, but they might also be, with colleagues in your party and just institutionally and how you relate to the other ministers. How do you navigate that difference between what they want to achieve and the funding that they need, and then your objectives and the funding that you have and the responsibilities that you have?
Yeah, and there are always constraints, even in COVID times when we are able to borrow money at historic low rates of interest. You still can't meet all of the asks and all of the demands that are being made of you. And I have said on the record, for example, when it comes to the review of our national development plan, the level of asks from colleagues represent about double more than double the current available resources in the existing plan, for example. So it is about good personal relationships. It's about engaging with people in a collegiate manner, going through the issues in detail. I think good open communication is important. So I do have to engage directly with my colleagues on a bilateral basis constantly. My officials have a structure whereby I would have a team of officials who are working with line departments. So there would be a team of officials in my department who work with the Department of Education on their spending on an ongoing basis. So there's a very close working relationship. I guess your guiding document is your program for government. And so if there is a dispute, that's the first place you will look. You know, is this a program for government commitment or not? And even if it is, it doesn't mean that you can fund it immediately. It may need to be done incrementally. And then you have a budgetary framework. And, you know, it has been very different in the past year or so because we have had to make exceptional provision for public spending in a manner that is outside of the normal budgetary framework. So what we have tried to do, I think pretty successfully, is separate what we call core spending, which is normal recurring spending that's going to happen every year, and COVID spending. And over time, as we emerge from COVID and as we get back to more normal conditions gradually, we have to unwind that COVID expenditure because that will be the key way in which we will close the budget deficit and ultimately bring the national finances of our country to a safe place, because we are now in an environment where we can benefit from historic low interest rates, as I mentioned earlier. That's because of the extraordinary interventions of the European Central Bank in terms of monetary policy and their bond buying program. And so that has been really helpful, but that's not going to last forever. We're also in an environment where the European Union has essentially suspended the normal fiscal rules. And again, those will be reinstated probably for the budget in October of next year, with the view to being fully reintroduced for 2023. So, you know, we have had to respond in an exceptional way to really exceptional circumstances. But as time goes by and as we get back to hopefully more normal conditions, then we will need to unwind those COVID expenditures. And I think that is going to be an understandable and natural point of tension with colleagues in government who will make very legitimate cases as to why that elevated level of expenditure should be continued indefinitely into the future. But if you were to do that, then you have to raise revenue to match those extra spends. Otherwise, you're carrying an indefinite large budget deficit into the future. And that just results in your national debt accumulating to a greater degree. And that's not a place where we want to go.
It's interesting. The pandemic on unemployment payment will be wound down over the next while, and some of these other things that you talked about will be kind of unwound. I mean, what kind of signs are you taking, either from the pandemic or from the economy, that that it is, you know, okay to begin to unpack some of those supports? What, you know, how are you measuring, you know, how you unpack those supports, or when you should do that?
It needs to be done in a manner that takes account of the public health situation. So as different sectors of the economy are allowed to reopen, then at least people who previously worked in that sector may have the opportunity of returning to work. So it would be unfair to withdraw enterprise supports or income supports if the economy, you know, isn't reopened. And we are in the process now of reopening the Irish economy. In overall terms, it's going really well. The number of people on the emergency pandemic unemployment payment is falling every week quite significantly. So you just have to take account of the prevailing conditions. And, you know, we have demonstrated over the last year that when circumstances change, we have been willing to change our policies as well. But based on the information and the knowledge that we have at the moment, we believe that the plan we have laid out for the gradual unwinding of that particular payment is fair, reasonable and proportionate. And equally, we have extended the wage subsidy scheme in Ireland to at least the end of the year. So we have really made extraordinary interventions in the Irish economy to support businesses, to just try to give them every chance of surviving the pandemic. And thankfully, the evidence is that the great majority of them have survived, and we are now looking at a really strong rebound of the Irish economy, which has already commenced. We want that rebound then to transition into a medium and longer term recovery. There is bound to be an initial burst of economic activity because of the pent-up demand, and so many different things have been suppressed over the last 15 months. But beyond that initial burst of activity, we need to maintain momentum on the economic recovery front, and that's why we have introduced a new National Economic Recovery Plan. We have also made our submission to the European Commission to draw down our share of funding under their EU-wide Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we are reviewing the National Development Plan to make sure that our public capital investment programme will be a key driver of economic recovery in the years ahead also.
Great. I want to return to some of those issues, especially the reform aspect of your briefing. But before we get too far from it and allude too much to it, could you give us a brief update on the conditions now in Ireland? We were talking just before the webinar started about the circumstances here in the US. I think most people feel as though the pandemic is on the wane, but I think most people also try to find a piece of wood to knock on when they say something like that. So what's the state now in Ireland, and as a minister, what are you keeping an eye on as the pandemic evolves?
We have made outstanding progress in the last number of months. We had an incredibly tough January and February in terms of the third wave in Ireland, and there was a heavy toll as a result of that by way of loss of human life, and it resulted in a prolonged set of restrictions across the Irish economy into April and May. So we have since then gradually moved to reopen the Irish economy and reopen our society. We have eased substantially the restrictions that have been in place. The next step is on the 5th of July. We are due to take a further move towards reopening. The only fly in the ointment at this point, and it is a significant one, is the growing concern about the Delta variant of COVID-19. And as you know, our nearest neighbours in the United Kingdom are now dealing with a situation where it has become the dominant strain. And it is not the dominant strain in Ireland at this point, but it is growing. And the evidence appears to be that it is even more infectious than the Kent variant, which I think has been renamed now as well as the Alpha one. So that is a concern, and the Chief Medical Officer has highlighted some concerns in relation to that variant. In parallel, our vaccination program is going very well now, and I think it's about 63% or so of the Irish adult population have had at least one dose, and more people now are getting their second dose and being fully vaccinated. So like with so many other countries, it is a race between the vaccine and the variants. So we're in a very good place in relation to the number of people in hospital, and the number of people in critical care is at a very, very low level. It's close to zero in effect. So we have really dealt with that issue from a peak of well over 2,000 people in our hospital system with COVID-19. It's now down to a very low number of perhaps 40 or 50. So it's very, very low. So we're making good progress, but the variant is a concern, and we've got a big decision to make next week in relation to the further reopening of our society and economy. We're keen to go ahead, but we will have to listen to the public health advice and take it on board.
Well, that's great to hear. I know there's a lot of people here, especially in the Boston region, that are looking to travel at some point to Ireland before the end of the year. I think a lot of people are hopeful, and I know people will continue to watch the developments there. I mean, one thing that struck me as I was preparing for this and looking at a lot of your annual reports and the strategies for your ministerial brief was that there are some areas where public expenditure and reform and some of the things you want to do, especially around the ICT infrastructure for government, digital access for the public to their public data and records, and the way they interface with the state, and the preparation of the civil service and the workforce more generally for a digital future kind of intersects with some of our experiences through the pandemic. I mean, we are digital now, and I think everyone's been thinking about this transformation. I mean, for you in your role as minister, in what ways has the pandemic created a need that will facilitate a future opportunity, perhaps, for the work that you do?
Yeah, I think some changes that were already happening have been accelerated at great pace. And before I touch on that, just to say on the issue of international travel, as you know, Ireland has signed up to the digital COVID certificate that has been agreed across the European Union. We intend to implement that from July the 19th, all going well. Aviation has really suffered a devastating period in the last 15 months or so, and we are really anxious to see the return of international travel as soon as possible. And it would be our intention to apply the same principles and the same system to travel between Ireland and non-EU countries. And so I think that there is a realistic prospect, at least for fully vaccinated people, of a return to travel between Ireland and the United States over the period ahead. That's something that we really do need to see. For us as a country, international connectivity is just so fundamental and intrinsic to our well-being and to our economic interests. You know how well Ireland has performed with foreign direct investment, and we have a situation where executives want to come and see their investments, see their facilities in Ireland. So we want to see the return of that as quickly as possible, and I think we will be able to make progress on that over the period ahead. I think in many respects, Bob, the future is green and digital, and we have sought to embrace that in the economic recovery plan. I mean, at a very simple level, you touched on the fact that this engagement is virtual today. Many Irish people now are working remotely, who 15 months ago it wouldn't have been even countenanced. The vast majority of people who have office-based jobs continue to work remotely, and I think in the future we will see a form of hybrid whereby people will spend some time in their normal place of work and some time working remotely, if their job lends itself to that, and not every sector and type of job does. But I think that opens up real opportunities for balanced regional development in Ireland as well. Will result in people having less commuting time. For example, it may have implications for our cities, and I think we do need to consider carefully the future of our cities, because we need Dublin as our capital to continue to be a strong and vibrant city. My own city of Cork, others like Limerick and Waterford and Galway, for example. So we will continue to need strong cities, and I think that is an important consideration as well. What we're doing with the delivery of public services is that we have a really ambitious digitalization strategy, and we are bringing more and more public services now online, and the public appetite is there for it. There is a national broadband plan being rolled out, which will take a number of years, but it means that every home in Ireland, every business, every farm is going to have a fibre optic cable broadband connection. And that work is underway, and it will take about 6 years to complete. But I think COVID has underlined the need for that connectivity in a digital sense. So that is ongoing as well. And as part of our submission to the EU for the Recovery and Resilience Plan, we have a wide range of green projects and digital projects that we believe will be absolutely transformative for the Irish economy. So the economy is not going to go back to exactly the way it was pre-COVID. I think some of the changes that have been accelerated are here to stay, and some consumer behavioural changes, I think, have been accelerated as well in terms of online shopping and so on. So there are risks and threats for businesses, but there are opportunities as well, and there will be new sectors opening up And I think Ireland, as a country with a very stable political system, English speaking, at the heart of the European Union, fully committed to its membership and to the Eurozone, with a common law system, is well placed, we believe, to benefit from economic recovery, to benefit in some ways from the UK's decision to leave the European Union, though of course there are many complexities there that you may wish to touch on. But we believe that we're in a very good position to achieve recovery over the years ahead.
That's very interesting. You said something interesting as well in a previous interview about the need for Ireland to develop indigenous, economic drivers, indigenous companies, and to have decision makers within companies be located in Ireland. Do you still feel that way as the pandemic is unfolded, or how has the pandemic affected your view on that issue?
Well, it is absolutely the case that we need to focus on developing a strong Indigenous enterprise base. We've made a lot of progress, I believe, as a country in recent years. We've done remarkably well in terms of foreign direct investment, and we're doing all we can to make sure that that continues. And we've had some very positive announcements even this week from global firms such as Accenture, for example. But I think that there is an opportunity to further develop the enterprise sector domestically, and through the supports that we provided in the context of COVID, our focus there really was to provide a lifeline to businesses. I mean, for the first time ever, the Irish government stepped in and started paying part of the wages of staff, in some cases the full wages of staff, and it was an extraordinary intervention, and one that we're going to continue to at least the end of the year. We introduced a whole suite of liquidity measures as well to assist businesses to access credit. We provided direct cash grant supports for businesses that were restarting. Even when businesses had to be closed as a result of the pandemic because of public health restrictions, we paid them money every week in the form of a COVID restrictions support payment to try and help them meet their fixed costs, such as rent costs and so on. We gave them exemptions from their local authority rates bills. So we've done a huge amount to support SMEs to try and help them to get through. And thankfully, the indications are that the vast majority will come through. In terms of improving the taxation system for SMEs in Ireland, there is now a Commission on Taxation and Welfare up and running that my colleague, Minister Donoghue, has established. That commission will report next year, and one of the specific terms of reference that they have is to examine the taxation environment within which SMEs operate. We've introduced a number of reforms in recent years around share options remuneration scheme. For example, I think we can do more in relation to research and development credits for SMEs, and so we've got a whole range of different taxation measures that are being looked at there. Enterprise investment scheme to see can we improve that to help attract more capital and more investment into SMEs to enable them to scale up. And the enterprise agencies that we have in Ireland, many of those on the call today will be very familiar with work of the IDA and winning international investment. But Enterprise Ireland assists Irish firms to develop markets abroad so that they have the opportunity of scaling up. And then for the very small businesses, we have local enterprise offices as well. So we're putting a huge focus on the development of the SME sector because we think it has real potential to assist us in our recovery efforts.
Great. There are a number of questions have come through, and I encourage people to continue to send those. We'll return to a couple of these. Some of them are very specific questions about travel, and Minister will get to those. But a question has come in about public housing expenditure, and now I think is a good time to talk about it, because we've been talking about the pandemic and the COVID crisis quite a lot, some of the work that you've been doing in the reform side of what you have. But of course, the challenges that face this, in states haven't gone away simply because of COVID. And through this, there have been sort of 5 areas. I know that your office was kind of outlined. You in the past, you've talked about globalization, geopolitical shifts, and then the 3 H's: housing, healthcare, homelessness. being kind of central to a need for response from government and from political parties. So, I mean, maybe we can cut into that around this question around housing a little bit. What attention did this viewer ask? What attention do you propose to give to public housing expenditure given the current housing crisis? So, I guess where do you hope to go? Where does your party hope to go with housing policy?
Sure. Well, certainly the general election last year was held in a pre-COVID context, and housing was undoubtedly the number one issue, and healthcare was also up there, and climate change was also a key issue in that election campaign. But there's no doubt that housing was the number one, and in a number of different respects, the falling home ownership rates in Ireland, that it is increasingly difficult for young people to aspire to home ownership and to achieve that aspiration. It has become more and more difficult, and then growing public housing waiting lists in terms of people waiting for a public home from a local authority or an approved housing body. So we are responding in an ambitious way. In the first budget, we gave a very significant increase in the Department of Housing's capital expenditure programme. So we gave sufficient money, for example, to construct 9,500 public homes as part of an overall addition of 12,750 homes to the public housing stock. And that compares to a previous high in the recent era in 2019 of about 5,800. So a very significant increase in the scale of ambition in the provision of public housing. I'm somebody who grew up, at least for part of my youth, in a local authority home. I lived there with my family when I was a young boy in a fantastic housing estate in a fabulous local community. And I absolutely see the need for us to support people in terms of securing a permanent home, whether it be a home that they rent or indeed a home that they might buy from a local authority ultimately. So we also are bringing in a suite of affordability measures. A new national affordable housing scheme has been introduced by my colleague, Minister Darragh O'Brien. The Land Development Agency is being put on a statutory footing to see how we can make better use of public land that may not be owned by council, but may be owned by the wider state sector. So really an effort to cut through the red tape and bureaucracy to get that land into use. So we've done all of that, and we've continued with the Help to Buy scheme to support first-time buyers who want to buy a home for the first time. But we need to increase housing output, Bob. That's the bottom line. Last year it was around 20,000 units produced in Ireland. The previous year, of course, last year was a COVID year. It was impacted by restrictions. The previous year was about 21,000. And the estimate of what we need is around 33,000 minimum per year. So we're a long way short of it. And again, for the first 4 months or so of this year, construction was shut down. So when you were coming into COVID with a housing crisis, and then your construction sector was shut down for a large part of the last 15 months, you get a sense of the pressure that is now coming to the fore once again in the housing market. So we are providing record resources to try to deal with it, to significantly increase direct building of public houses, to set up the National Affordable Housing Scheme, and to support the work of the Land Development Agency. But this is going to be a multi-annual task that we have, and we are now finalising a new housing strategy, which will be called Housing for All. It will be the successor to the Rebuilding Ireland programme that the last government was pursuing, and it will be very ambitious, and it's going to require a whole of government approach to tackle the housing crisis.
Of course, solving the housing crisis or addressing the housing crisis is important to individuals who are, without housing, or struggling to get on to into the housing system, and look for something sustainable. But how important is it to your party's future and to government?
Oh, it is fundamentally important in that sense, but it's even more important to the people that need the support, the people who who don't have a home, people who are homeless and who need to have a secure roof over their head. I mean, that is our motivation, is to fix this issue. And I believe that we can make huge progress. I have no doubt that we will. And it's about supporting people who want to buy a home as well. And that's just going to involve the state playing a bigger role. But also we need to encourage and facilitate the construction of homes by the private sector, because the state can't do everything. We have a very ambitious public capital programme. The overall capital budget at the moment within that particular department is around €2.7 billion a year. We will be looking to improve on that in the context of Housing for All, but the state can't do everything, so we need the private sector to ramp up the delivery of homes across the country as well. There are viability issues, particularly around construction of apartment developments for sale. The costs are very high in developing multi-unit developments like that, and that's why we have seen the growth of the build to rent sector in Ireland in relation to apartment developments, because it's just not viable at this time to build a block of apartments for sale to individual purchasers, and that is a problem, because we do want a mix of tenure in developments, and I think that that is an important objective, that where large new developments are being built, I believe that there should be a mix. I believe that's good for the community, a mix between private ownership, public housing. We're also introducing cost or affordable rental schemes now as well. And so that's going to be an important part of our work over the period ahead. But look, yeah, of course it is politically important. I acknowledge that. Fianna Fáil, the party that I am part of, has the housing ministry. We also have the health ministry. So we've taken on two of the toughest portfolios at this time. But look, that's a great opportunity. It's a huge test for sure. But it's a really great opportunity for the party after being in opposition for a decade. And these are two areas that, as I said, dominated the general election that was held last year. And if we can make progress in housing and health, then I think the public will recognise that and hopefully reward us in some sense.
So you mentioned earlier Brexit, and it's remarkable that we've gone through 40 minutes without speaking of it. It usually dominates conversations, but more and more it's coming towards the end of conversations, it seems. Although maybe it shouldn't. Your Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, has taken on the Brexit brief and addressed the constitutional questions that exist on the island right now. You mentioned a number of years ago that an Irish sea border might not be a palatable solution to the Brexit conundrum, and in some ways, it's proving that that's quite a challenge right now for some of the parties. I mean, how do you see the Brexit conflict now developing, and where is there a possible resolution to the differences between the European Union and the United Kingdom on this?
Yeah, I think we all have to work our way through this. It is Brexit has thrown up this problem, and while a border down the Irish Sea is of course problematic, a border on the island of Ireland is something that cannot be countenanced, and that is the bottom line. This is about all of the important things, of course, such as trade and the free movement of people and so on, but it's about something more important and more fundamental, and that is peace on our island. And so that is why we have to work through this in a calm and an orderly manner. And I recognise that for many in the unionist community in particular, the implementation of the protocol has been very problematic. And I think that the structures that are there as part of the withdrawal agreement and the protocol need to be worked through. I think sides, UK government need to avoid unilateral actions. I welcome the fact now that recently the UK have applied for an extension to the period of grace, for example, in relation to certain checks, and the European Union will hopefully look on that favourably. But it is about the detail here. It's about the nitty-gritty of how we can square all of the competing priorities about maintaining peace on the island, protecting the Good Friday Agreement, ensuring that we have a seamless border on the island, also that east-west trade between Great Britain and the island of Ireland can continue, that Ireland's place in the single market and the European Union is not in any way compromised or called into question. And these are all of the priorities which, you may argue some of them are in conflict, and we have to work our way through this. But the problem has been created by Brexit, and that is just a reality that I know not everybody wants to hear. Ireland didn't cause this issue. The UK made a sovereign decision to leave the European Union, but we share a border on the island of Ireland with the United Kingdom in the form of Northern Ireland. That means a border between the single market of the European Union and the United Kingdom, and that raises a lot of complications and complexities that we simply have to deal with. And as part of the mix, then you have issues of political identity, the constitutional status, which is not in question because the Good Friday Agreement sets out the framework for that, and the Irish government has recommitted on many occasions to the Good Friday Agreement. But the preservation of peace on the island is the most fundamental of all, and I want to acknowledge once again the really positive role of the US administration, the personal interest taken in this issue by President Biden is particularly welcome, and the comments that he made, for example, at the recent G7 were very helpful from an Irish context. But conflict won't resolve this. The European Union and the UK have to work through the detail of this to ensure that trade can continue and that nobody feels that their identity has been diminished. Because if people feel diminished, that's not going to end well. And so we have to work our way through this. But it is about the granular detail of SPS checks, customs checks, and so on, in a manner that protects the integrity of the European Union single market, but also respects that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and we very much respect that from the perspective of the Irish government.
Minister, you mentioned earlier that Brexit had created some circumstances that could be seen as an opportunity for Ireland. The question had come in from one of the viewers about this in particular, and about the ways in which Ireland could act as a transatlantic bridge between the European Union and the United States. I mean, what are you seeing? What kind of specific changes are you seeing in that relationship that can be related to Brexit, or are you seeing changes that are related to Brexit?
Well, first of all, I think the re-engagement between the United States and the European Union is so positive, and it was really heartening to see the first EU-US summit take place for 7 years. I mean, we are very close allies. We share values in terms of our democratic system, of openness, of transparency, of human rights. And so the European Union and the United States have so much in common. And if we are to tackle the enormous global challenges that we face, whether it be climate change, international security, dealing with a global pandemic, then these two great powers simply have to work together. And so I was delighted to see President Biden come to Europe and to, as well as the G7 in England, to visit Brussels for the EU-US summit. I think that was particularly encouraging and welcome. I think Ireland is uniquely placed to be the bridge. We are, of course, the closest European Union country to the United States, probably the one with the deepest ancestral ties, cultural ties, political ties, and a very strong economic relationship as well. We continue to invest hugely in our diplomatic relationship with the United States because we deeply value it. We know how important it is to us as a country, for the 30 million or so people in the United States who have Irish connections, Irish ancestry. And so that relationship is fundamental for us and will continue to be. and the personal interest that President Biden takes in all matters to do with Ireland is something that I know the Irish people take great pride in, and it's really encouraging for us to hear him reference Ireland so often, and I know that people take great heart from that. So I think Ireland is uniquely placed really to act as the bridge between the European Union and the United States, but I think to see them now working together, to see the US recommit to the Paris Climate Accord, to tackling climate action, to see the US and the EU trying to come onto the one page on some of the big global issues is really encouraging for people like me who see multilateralism, who see countries working together as the only way of tackling the challenges that we face, given the scale of them.
Thank you, Minister. There are two questions that have come in, and I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer to this, but maybe you can direct people to useful resources around this. Both of them are around the travel circumstances related to COVID, something I promised we would return to. One viewer asks, do you know anything about the bed and breakfast situation in the rural areas outside of the primary tourist hotspots? Are bed and breakfasts being encouraged to reopen? Again, Minister, if you don't know the policy on this, maybe you can advise people where to find it.
Accommodation providers are open in Ireland, so hotels, guest houses, B&Bs are open for residents. So at this moment in time, you can't walk into a hotel for a meal or a drink, but if you're a resident, you can avail of all the services. So accommodation providers are open, and as I say, we are hoping that on the 5th of July we will move to a point where indoor dining will resume for everybody else. So indoor dining is available for a resident of a hotel, a B&B, a guest house. For non-residents, hopefully on the 5th of July, it will be open for them. Gov.ie is an excellent source of information in relation to all things to do with just practical questions about COVID restrictions in Ireland, and also you have the various links are embedded there around international travel and the links to the Department of Foreign Affairs website, but that's the position currently in relation to B&Bs and other accommodation providers.
And a very similar question has come in about Christmas travel, and I think the viewer is trying to figure out whether or not they should book. Again, would you advise them to go to the website?
Yeah, and look, you won't be given any definitive position at this point in relation to Christmas, but the intention is that far in advance of that, we will have a resumption of international travel in and out of Ireland. So, as I mentioned, the digital COVID cert will be implemented in Ireland on the 19th of July, unless the government has to make a decision to the contrary, but that is the current policy position of the government, and it's our intention to proceed with that. Other European Union countries are starting a little earlier from next week in some cases. So our intention then would be that for what we call third countries, so non-EU countries, travel in and out of Ireland from and to these third countries would be essentially governed by the same rules. And in essence, under that digital COVID cert, it shows 3 pieces of information. Are you fully vaccinated? Did you have COVID in the last 9 months and you have recovered from it? And do you have a negative PCR test? So at this point in time, for travel within the European Union, the intention is that if somebody fulfills one of those criteria, they will be allowed to travel to Ireland. And as I say, it is our intention to extend the same system to non-EU countries. But look, the safest thing as it gets closer to your intended time for travel is to check gov.ie and the Department of Foreign Affairs website in Ireland. But I fully expect that people will be travelling to Ireland much sooner than that.
Well, it's a tricky situation. Speaking personally, it was difficult when the pandemic first hit to figure out if you should cancel plans, and I think equally people are struggling whether or not to make plans. That said, we are planning to go at Christmas, although I don't take responsibility for anyone purchasing flights on the back of my enthusiasm. So the question has come in from a viewer here, and I think we might make this the last question. It's a very big question, Minister. The question reads, what kind of economic appetite would the Republic have for United Ireland? The question goes on a bit, but let's maybe just leave it there and let you kind of shape your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that has to be answered in the context of the politics that we face as well. And, you know, I am a minister for the Fianna Fáil party in government. It is our long-standing position that we aspire to a united Ireland, but a united Ireland by consent, and we fully subscribe, as you know, to the Good Friday Agreement. And in fact, you know, we're very much in government and leading the government with Bertie Ahern at the time, the Irish Taoiseach, who, along with Tony Blair and the party leaders in Northern Ireland, and of course the great George Mitchell, who played such an important role in the development of the Good Friday Agreement. So I want to see a united Ireland in the years ahead, but I think the only way of achieving that is by building relationships, is by doing the groundwork, by ultimately winning the argument that an all-island economy is in the interests of everybody on the island. We are obviously committed members of the European Union. Northern Ireland now is outside of the European Union, though they do have the opportunity of benefiting from both being sharing the island with the Republic of Ireland, and therefore having access to the single market, and also, of course, being part of the United Kingdom internal market. So there's a significant opportunity there, I believe, for the economy in Northern Ireland. And you know, various studies have been done around the economics of a united Ireland, but I don't think that the economics will be the driver of it happening. I think ultimately it is about engagement, it is about building relationships, it isn't about forcing people into positions, it isn't about saying, you know, we have to have a border poll in the next 3 or 4 years and setting arbitrary dates, which can be very divisive. You have to have the groundwork done, lay the foundations in a very careful and gradual way, and you know, build relations, continue to embed peace in Northern Ireland, improve the relationships across communities, help to bring about more and more of education being provided to children who are Catholic, who are Protestant, who are neither, together into one environment. I think those things are important. But what we are seeing, of course, in the north is a growing number of middle ground people who don't necessarily describe themselves as being nationalist or unionist. And I think ultimately that will be the decisive block of people as to where they see their future being best served. So I do want to see United Ireland. I can see very significant economic benefits ultimately from it. But I think that we have to recognise there's a very sensitive political context to all of this. And, you know, I don't think that beating the drum and looking for, you know, an imminent border poll at a time when things are delicately balanced is a responsible thing to do. So we just need to continue to work on building those relationships.
Great. Well, thank you, Minister. I hope you're able to continue to build those relationships and additional North-South ministerial meetings and other apparatuses that bring you together with your colleagues in Northern Ireland and Westminster. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to speak with you. I want to thank you for taking an hour answering a number of questions, some down to the nitty-gritty of government policy, and then others you know, very large questions. So thank you very much for your time today. I also want to thank Laoise and the Consulate for their partnership in this series.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Alicia. And thanks everyone for tuning in.